on that Thursday night, September 9th.
And then let's look at our primetime games. I know that last year this was a bit of a topic because I know that that was when the team did not necessarily have its best performances. Where have we landed on the coincidence versus causation here and how we think that the primetime games could
You
be
know, it
this
was a
year?
funny process last year because I don't believe in their heart of hearts that the coaches and players really thought they had any trouble on prime. It just happened, right? Their worst games just happened to be on primetime. But on the other hand, there was some adjustment in the schedule by Bruce Arians towards the end to try, they started practicing at night beforehand and they did some more stuff on the day of the game. So obviously they were thinking about it. Maybe we don't necessarily believe that there's anything here, but let's do the best we can anyway to try to do as best as we possibly can. And yeah, the primetime games weren't great, but they were fine in the postseason, right? I didn't see any problems in the postseason. So this team is not worried about playing in primetime. And obviously the organization is thrilled to be on the maximum number of 5 that can be scheduled at the beginning of the season. Now, it can go up to as much as 7 if you add games through flexing at the end, if the Buccaneers are playing some important games at the end and they get flexed to like Sunday night. But I think probably the most exciting part about all this is the 2 Sunday night games, because that is a platform that the Buccaneers have not been on very much in the last decade and a half. And even last year when we were supposed to be on it against Las Vegas because of some COVID concerns with the Raiders, that one got flexed backwards into the afternoon and you didn't get your Sunday night game. So to me, that game against New England, obviously, everybody in week 4, and then later in the season against New Orleans, probably 2 of the biggest highlights on the schedule.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And then now looking at day 1 of training camp in the books, we know that no pads have gone on yet, so not necessarily the most explanatory of practices in terms of what we can learn. But is there anything that stood out to you from what happened yesterday?
Well, yeah, and like you said, it's a little different than it used to be. It keeps changing, these rules and regulations for training camp. Used to be you had to be in shorts or spiders for 2 days before you could put on pads. Now it's more like 7. They won't go into pads until Saturday, I believe. So you got a lot of this still basically non-contact stuff. So you can't see a lot about what's going on in the trenches and so on. But you can see the receivers and the DBs going at it. And I thought the offense did a good job yesterday of getting players open. I mean, there were a few too many drop passes, according to Bruce Arians, at the end. To point out specifically one guy, Jalen Darden, as I said yesterday, a guy I'm really excited about. He was doing a fantastic job of getting open. He just maybe, Coach Arians said, maybe had a little bit of nerves on his first camp practice because he has excellent hands, but had a couple bobbles, and I think you won't see a whole lot of that. But, I mean, the good news is he was getting really open. So, it's exciting about the structure of the offense, and it's exciting about some of these new players like him and Giovanni Bernard.
Yeah, and speaking of those couple positions in particular, we talked about we're interested in that running back rotation, and we're interested in who's going to make some of those last receiver spots. And this was our first practice, of course, not seeing Justin Watson out there that is part of that because of that knee injury that we talked about. So did we learn anything about, who was throwing with who and catching in terms of, Kyle, even the quarterbacks and who was on what field and working with who?
Yeah, that's most fans probably know by now, Coach Arians likes to, when he's got a 90-man roster, he likes to split it up into 2 halves when they're doing like full team and 7-on-7 work, because you can get so much more work then. So your first and second string guys like Tom Brady and Blaine Gabbert were leading it on one field, and Ryan Griffin and Kyle Trask were on the other field. And most of the players with Griffin and Trask were the guys that would start out at least in training camp at the 3rd or 4th spots on the depth chart. So Jalen Darden kind of actually got to play with both sides quite a bit. But, you just basically had the starters and the main reserves on one side and then a little farther down the depth chart on the other side. But what that does is it gives the coaches a lot more, there's a lot of coaches too, so they can split it up and still run both very well. And then the coaches that are on the side on field 1 just go in and watch the practice tape afterwards to the other side. And that way Bruce Arians and his crew get to see a lot more reps from a lot more players.
Yesterday, one segment we broke down offense, one segment we broke down defense. Of course, we didn't give enough love to the special teams.
Oh,
they're
true.
always the forgotten group, So I figured we'd chat a little bit about them now. And what are you going to be looking at? Again, we talked about the consistency. You have your same punter, kicker, long snapper, but overall looking at not only them, but the entire special teams, what are the storylines you think you're going to be watching and what that unit could look like this year?
The Bucs did well kicking the ball last year, and obviously Ryan Suckup was a godsend. He sort of calmed down that position that's been such a trouble for the Buccaneers for about a decade. Gave the Bucs everything they wanted. I think he missed 3 times all year, counting the playoffs. And he was perfect from 40 yards in on field goals, which is what Coach Arians really wanted. He wanted to be able to rely on that. Now, you do have a second kicker here in rookie Jose Borregales from Miami, who was an undrafted free agent. And I think some people were a little surprised that he chose to come here with a team that had a kicker they obviously trust quite a bit. But when you think about it, he's putting it on film for all 32 teams right here. So even if he doesn't beat out Ryan Suckup for the job, or maybe get a practice squad spot because the Bucs might want to carry a second kicker because of the COVID thing, he'll be getting, he's basically auditioning for everybody. And I guess you can't say he doesn't have a shot, but the Buccaneers obviously felt really good about Ryan Suckup. Last year they brought him in really with only a couple days of practice to go and said it was a competition with Matt Gay, but you can't decide that in a couple days. They obviously knew from Ryan Suckup's track record that when he was healthy he was very good. So I know you wanted to ask about the other parts though, like kick coverage and so on, and that's where a lot of the young guys are going to come in, like your linebackers like KJ Britt and Grant Stewart and Chris Wilcox when he's healthy enough to practice. The Buccaneers really drafted some guys with special teams in mind, and the coverage units were not awesome last year. They need to be better, and so the Buccaneers probably will have some new blood on those units this year, and that's something that's going to be figured out a little bit here on the practice field, but probably even more so in those 3 preseason games.
And how about in terms of the return game? How set in stone is that? How many guys are vying for that job, and how big of a factor will that be in terms of who makes certain roster spots and how many guys you keep at those positions?
I don't think it's set in stone at all. I think that's very much an open competition, and you can't count out Jaden Mickens as essentially the incumbent. But they definitely drafted Jalen Darden with the hopes that he could grab that punt return job at least, and maybe the kickoff return job. And the kickoff return job is probably a little less important because you're just reducing the number of kickoffs every year that can actually be returned because of the ever advancement in rules and trying to make that play less dangerous. And still, it could go to Darden, but there's a number of guys like running backs and so on that could fill that job if need be.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here and give you a look at some of the highlights from yesterday's practice. And then, of course, we're going to come back and have even more topics to go over and take your Facebook questions. So make sure you use this break to submit some of those on the Facebook Live video. So check out these highlights from yesterday. Welcome back into Training Camp Live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. As always, we are talking everything training camp, giving you as many live looks into practice happening behind us as we can. And we'll be taking your Facebook questions in our final segment here, so make sure you ask those underneath our live video on the Buccaneers Facebook page. So we've talked so much about the continuity that they have this year, right? That they brought back not only all these starters, but yesterday that was just the most incredible set of graphics we've ever shown of the percent of snaps that we have back from last year, and basically the answer is all of them.
Yes.
So now we thought, we need to talk about some of the new guys. We've talked so much about all the continuity. It doesn't mean there aren't any new people or any new people that could make an impact this year. So let's go ahead and throw up this graphic that is about meeting our new crew. So we got the draft picks right here. Tell us some of the guys that you're really excited to watch and who might stand out.
Well, I mean, Joe Tryon is one that is most likely to have a large role this year, and maybe Jalen Darden, as we were talking about, as a kick returner. But Joe Tryon, if he just plays up to the expectations that the Bucs have for him, he should be a big part of that edge rushing pass rotation. That was interesting. And so he looked good apparently yesterday. Coach Arians said he liked what Tryon did. He got to do some with the Field 1 group, as we were talking about when they got together, but he wanted to see more of what he did on Field 2 on the tape. Chris Wilcox, as we know, isn't practicing yet. couple of those other guys were on field too, and then Robert. One thing I saw about Robert Hainsey, I know you're laughing because you know what I'm going to bring up here.
I'm glad you're bringing it up, not me.
Not only is Robert Hainsey learning the center position, he played only right tackle at Notre Dame, but then he went to the Senior Bowl and he played all the interior spots. And so teams became comfortable that he'd be a guard. When he got here, the Buccaneers wanted to say, okay, now let's train him at center so he can be this super versatile guy that can back up just about any position. Well, playing center, and he was basically the second guy in after Ryan Jensen. Playing center here means learning how to play with a towel down the back of your pants. And apparently it's not particularly easy to get that thing situated exactly where you want it to.
Yeah.
There were a lot of on-field adjustments going on. I really felt for him because he was obviously trying to get it just right for Tom Brady, but it was something totally new for him.
And I think it's not even just a towel, isn't it? Like a towel with baking soda or something. There's
it's
there's
delightful.
a Tom Brady recipe for how to make sure that you keep the ball dry when you're the center. And yeah, we were watching that. It's just so that's one of the biggest indicators that he was working to learn the center position. We were like, oh, we see him doing the towel.
We saw that.
So
we're like, okay, he's playing center.
he's
And sure enough, he was the second guy in after.
The things that we use for journalism investigation out here is very different. And I do think it is interesting to talk about Robert Hainsey because, of course, we have all the starters back from the offensive line last year. And we saw that Aaron Stinnie was an incredibly reliable backup when he was asked to come in for Alex Kappa. So what are the odds of who you keep, how many you keep, and Robert Hainsey's potential role as a backup, and is that why we're seeing him work on all these positions?
Yeah, I think the minimum that you would keep at offensive line, counting the starters and reserves, is 8, because nowadays you can keep 8 of them active, and there's no reason not to, because you only get that 48 spot if you have 8 active offensive linemen. Now, right at the end of the season, the Buccaneers actually went all the way down to 7, which is extremely low, but it only really worked because we had that you can elevate guys from the practice squad rules. We bring up Ted Larson for each game. Otherwise, that's not going to work. I would think it's more likely that you keep 9 at least to start the season, and then you see how it goes with injuries and so on. And like you said, you have your starting 5, and you have Aaron Stinnie, who's obviously, now we realize, a very qualified backup. In fact, I'm sure he comes in this camp thinking, I'm going to try to compete to keep that job after he did so well in the postseason with Alex Kappa. And then you have you brought back Josh Wells, who's a guy that they're very comfortable with the last couple of years as a swing tackle. So that's 7 right there, and you got to believe that Robert Hainsey is a 3rd-round pick and a guy they envision being able to back up maybe all 5 positions is going to make it. So that's 8 right there. So then you get into the competition of, do they have a 9th spot, which if I were betting, I would say they will. And who's it going to be? Is it going to be somebody coming back like Brad Seaton? Is it going to be an undrafted rookie that they like a lot like Cedarius Hutcherson? So that'll be a good battle. I won't say that it's easy for a fan to be able to watch what the offensive line battle is and who's winning, especially when the pads haven't gone on yet. But the coaches will know, and I think that'll be a very interesting battle. Will there be a 9th guy, and who will it be?
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting to see that Ali Marpet has finally gotten to stay put at a position for a while, because we forget that at the first few years he was here, he was playing all the things.
He played all of them.
And I think about how now that shows what a confidence they have in their backups, that you can just plug and play in terms of who's out, instead of feeling this need to shift a whole bunch of your current guys around.
Right.
That it's let them have that consistency. And he talks about, him getting to play over there by Donovan and their chemistry, and the way that helps with their communication, to be able to not feel like you need a guy like Ali to play 1,000 things, and you can leave him in that spot and get that communication key where you're only really changing one person instead of having to move everybody around. I think it speaks to the depth.
And then last year when Ali was out for a few weeks, they first tried Joe Haig playing guard and didn't really like the results of that one. So they did do a little moving around with Ryan Jensen moving over. So they could do that again if they wanted to. They could probably feel good about Aaron Stinnie stepping in, or they could move Jensen over to left guard again and put Robert Hainsey in. But, we basically mentioned all the offensive linemen at this point except for Tristan Wirfs.
Yeah.
And
he's kind of good at that offensive line.
And you were talking about newcomers this year. He was one of the main newcomers last year. And I don't think anybody could have expected that this guy, they expect him to be the starter. They expect him to be good. But by the opinion of a lot of people, including our head coach, he was basically a Pro Bowler last year. And to have a rookie step in and play at that level right away is just incredible. And it's probably an underrated part of how good how the Buccaneers were able to win it all last year.
Yeah, it's so true. And we talk often about the jump from year 1 to year 2 for guys. And I have to imagine, it's crazy to expect much of a jump from him and Antoine Winfield Jr. when they did already play so well. It's like, what are we expecting of them at this point? But when you think not only is there normally a jump there, but they didn't even have an off season
Right.
as rookies. This is their first time getting a normal off season. So I'm sure for them, things are going to feel so much easier than they did last year for so many reasons.
It's going to be hard, though, to quantify a leap if it happens for Tristan Wirfs, because essentially he allowed 1 sack all of last year. And how you going to get much better than that?
Yeah.
Antoine Winfield, I think, showed us he can make huge plays, and maybe he'll make more of them.
Okay, all right. Well, we are going to talk about rookies this year. We are playing Meet the Rookies in a lot of these shows, so you guys get a chance to know some of these new guys. So let's meet KJ Britt.
I'm just grateful for the opportunity, just grateful for the chance. You know, they trusted in me and believed me enough to draft me. Believed in me enough to just get me down here and just so I could bring my talents and my skills to Tampa Bay. You know, it's just a great situation. Just be able to learn from 2 great players. You know, 2 players that I was watching. You know, growing up. Levante was watching him in high school. You know, Devin, watching him all throughout college, and just be able to play behind him, to learn, and then playing with a great linebacker coach as well. Every year, coaching linebackers, you know, for 100 tackles. So I feel like it's a great role, and just get in where I fit in. You know, for some special teams, whatever, just ready to play. I love the way they play fast, physical. They're determined to make every play, do everything right. Just not tackling, but, you know, interceptions and sacks and, you know, forced fumbles. They're just great to watch them. I told my UCL on my thumb. I thought I was going to have a huge senior season. I just learned how much I really love the game. Being around the game and just being around my teammates really brought me joy when I was really down. So the game is something that I can't really put into words. It's just like precious to me. I'm a firm believer that you got to attack the day, win each day. You day 14, day 15, you won each day. You're going to put yourself in a good spot. So I'm just embracing every role that they give to me, get a little bit better each day, that somebody see it. And I can only control what I can control, and that's just what my actions are. They just get somebody who loves football, love, you know, the culture that's here. I just love winning, man. I love winning.
Welcome back into Training Camp Live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, and it is our final segment, which means it is time for us to take your Facebook questions. But of course, before we do that, I actually want to give a very special shout out because Brett Green, who is in charge of the football video department, meaning the guys that actually, you know, video the practices, send that to all the scouts, send that to all the coaches, is letting us use one of their big high cameras for our show that they use to get actual practice footage to give us a unique angle. And there it is. Look at that camera. And so I wanted to say shout out to them. This is what is so cool about being part of the team. Everybody here, one team, one cause, right? You know, they're helping us out.
And while we're on the subject, this is the kind of thing that you can see how NFL football evolves throughout the years. Because remember, do you see a scissor lift anywhere?
Yeah,
Remember how we
true.
used to have scissor lifts and the video guys had to go up on those, and if there was any wind or bad weather, they were in a bad spot up there. Now they just sit in
Which
the
of
bottom.
course never happens in Florida this time of year.
Now they sit in the bottom of what looks like the controls of a boat, and they can just remotely control
Put the
that
mast
thing.
up
Yep.
with the camera. So again, thanks to the whole video department for helping us out here. Okay, so let's dive into some of these questions here. Again, if you want to ask us something, you can shoot it over to us on the Facebook comments. And we had a question from Steve asking, how long do you see Cam Brate and O.J. Howard being out, and if there is a time without both of them, what that could look like?
Well, I think we said yesterday that you and I are both a little gun shy of making really strong predictions about how long a guy will be out. I can say that given the roster status of those two, it would seem more likely that OJ would return before Cam, because they felt the need to put Cam on active PUP before the start of camp, which the only point of that, since it doesn't save you a roster spot, is to keep open the option, or to create the option if you needed to put that player on reserve PUP to start the season. So there's at least a thought that Cam's injury could be long enough that it could endanger the regular season. Otherwise, there's no reason to put him on PUP. And the fact that they did not do that with O.J. Howard would seem to indicate to me that they don't expect that to be any sort of necessity. So between those two, it seems more likely that O.J. would come back sooner. But beyond that, I really don't want to speculate a whole lot. I will say their absence yesterday in practice obviously gave a lot more playing time to Cody McElroy and Tanner Hudson, and sometimes that can be sort of the silver lining to situations like this, since you already have a pretty good feel for what OJ and Cam can bring, and you're probably trying to figure out do you keep a fourth tight end, and if so, who is that going to be? So it's a good opportunity to see both of those guys. I personally saw Cody McElroy catch a whole bunch of passes during one of the passing periods.
And Jermaine had asked, is TJ Logan on the roster?
No, he's not.
Yeah, we had talked about the return game earlier, and I thought that was
Yeah.
good to mention that was someone who unfortunately dealt with a lot of injuries in his time here and had been a role in that. We also had, of course, I always love when we can tell when the Florida people are watching.
Kyle Trask?
Kyle Trask. We got a lot of questions about how Kyle Trask is looking.
Surprisingly, the only guy from Florida on our roster right now.
That is interesting.
We've got like 4 guys from James Madison and 3 guys from North Texas.
That is very
But
random.
we only have 1 Gator? I mean, when does that ever happen?
That is very random. And actually, it works out well because Matthew had also asked how many QBs we'll keep on the roster, so we can
Okay.
kind of lump all those together.
Yes. It could be anywhere from 2 to 4. I know that coach has said throughout his first few years here that he'd love to go with just 2. But if you look at the record from when he's been here and even back in Arizona, he's almost always gone with 3. And often that's by necessity due to injuries or things like that. This time I think it's probably 3 by necessity due to the fact that you want to make sure you keep Kyle Trask. So Tom Brady's your starter. I think, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, I think Coach Arians really prefers to have an experienced guy, a guy who's made starts in the NFL as his number 1 backup to your starter. So to me, that says Blaine Gabbert or Ryan Griffin. And judging by which group they were playing with yesterday, Blaine Gabbert is ahead in that competition right now. So I think you probably most likely keep 3 on the 53-man roster. But as we saw last year, they also felt it was important to have a 4th quarterback on the practice squad, especially with that expanded practice squad, which is what we kind of expect to have again this year. It hasn't really been determined yet, just in case there's some COVID issues that knocks out several of your quarterbacks at once. So you could see Brian Griffin, with a veteran exception, go to the practice squad, and he was actually asked that question during minicamp, and he said, however it shakes out, he's up for whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I'm sure he would prefer to keep his spot on the active roster, but if there's not one available to him, if Blaine Gabbert wins that job and they want to keep him on the practice squad, I think he would do that.
And we had a question from, I believe it was Michael, who asked, is Alex Kappa's position secure after Stanley came in and did a good job?
Coach made a point during minicamp that he really didn't think any of the starting spots were probably going to be up for competition. I mean, they're all up for competition, but didn't likely think that there would be a lot of change in the starting lineup. But if you were to pick a spot to conjecture if there could be, that would certainly be one that would come to mind. Alex Kappa played fine, and he's got a couple years under his belt yet, and I think he can get even better. But I think after how well Stinney played, you have to at least consider him, right? You have to at least give him a shot and see if he's the better option there. But no, I think most likely Kappa holds on to that.
A different Michael asked, how different do you see our offense being with all the tight ends available this year?
I think that's a good point. When we started the season for the first 4 games, O.J. Howard was playing a little over 50% of the snaps, and almost all of those were in 2 tight end sets with Rob Gronkowski. Then O.J. got hurt, and that's called 12 personnel when you have 2 tight ends on the field and 1 running back. I think it declined a little bit, our usage in 12 personnel, but gradually went back up as Cam Brate sort of filled that same role, and then you saw a lot of that in the playoffs. And it was really kind of good. The 12 personnel was working because obviously Rob Gronkowski is a focal point, but look at, for instance, the Washington game. They kept Rob in to block a lot, sort of probably caught Washington by surprise by sending Cam Brate out, and he caught, I think, 4 passes for 80 yards and had a really nice postseason. So given what we've seen that they can do with those 2 combinations, if all 3 of those guys are healthy and ready to go, I think you could see the 12 personnel tick up a little bit. It went up a few percentage points last year from the year before, from about 20 to 24%. So I could see it being a little bit higher than that. Of course, with all these receivers, you're still going to be in 11 personnel quite a bit because you want those guys on the field.
Right. Frank had asked, who do you think will start at running back if you had to make a guess? And maybe even you can talk about what you think starting means, because I think with them it might not always mean that you're getting all the carries or how that's split up.
I think that's the way Coach Arians views it. If we just assume that we're deciding right here between Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones, which does seem most likely, he calls both of those guys starters. And it probably doesn't matter who's on the field for the first offensive play. If that's Ronald Jones, but he gets 5 carries and Leonard Fournette gets 15, did it matter that Ronald Jones started? Probably not.
Right.
And I think that's the way the coaches look at it. That being said, I'm guessing if I were one of those guys, those guys, it probably does matter to them a little bit. You want to be the starter, right?
Yeah.
And I think both of them have a good claim to it. So that's a good battle. If I had to guess right now, if I'm a coach, I don't think Ronald Jones lost his job due to anything other than a couple poorly timed injuries and a stint on the COVID list. So as great as Leonard Fournette looked, to me that job to start and be the first man on the first snap is Ronald Jones's to lose.
Yeah, I do like how they use them, though, where it really wasn't always about a starter or not, and it would even be alternating quarters, it felt like. That it'd be like Ronald Jones would be your first and third quarterback, or third quarter guy, and then Fournette would be your second and fourth quarter guy. It was really interesting. I think it kept everybody fresh.
And then there's the hot hand approach.
Yeah.
So if one of those guys is really killing it, like Ronald Jones did in Carolina last year, then you roll with them.
Right, yeah. And again, just such an embarrassment of riches that you were able to talk about that. Thomas asked, do you think Chris Wilcox is making the roster now that he is not practicing?
Well, that definitely makes it tougher for him. And again, he is a 7th-round draft pick, and I don't know what the exact percentages are, but not every 7th-round draft pick makes the roster. I would suspect that if he doesn't, there's a practice squad spot for him if he's not claimed by another team. It's a little hard to call right now because he's not practicing. And so probably the most key factor in that is when does he get back on the field, because he's not likely to make the roster if he doesn't practice at all in training camp. But then he might end up on reserve PUP, which means he wouldn't be on either of those lists, and you'd have 6 more weeks to figure out what you want to do with him. So for him to make the roster, he's probably going to have to get back on the field within the next couple weeks, and we don't know that yet.
Okay, and then we'll close with this. Thomas had also asked, what do you think is a realistic number of sacks for the sack leader of the Bucs this season, and who do you think it's going to be?
I think it's going to be Shaq this year. I know that's not really going out on the limb, but he did he did finish 3rd last year. So
yeah,
I am picking the 3rd place guy from last year. Shaq, I just feel like he's extraordinarily motivated to have a huge season this year, and I think he worked his way through the challenges last year of suddenly being the targeted guy and getting a lot more double teams. He wasn't consistently producing from week to week during a part of the season, to which a point that he brings up. I'm not making that up. That's something he said, and he wants to be able to produce like he was producing in the postseason on a weekly basis during the regular season, and I have a strong feeling that he's going to be able to do so. So I think it's a bit much to ask him to match his 19.5 sacks from 2019, but I think it's Shaq Barrett, and I'll go with 13.5.
Okay, well, that is going to do it for us on this edition of Training Camp Live. We are with you every day that there are open practices. We'll go ahead and throw up that schedule for you to see when we're going to be having these live shows. So we will be back with you tomorrow morning at 8:30 for 30 minutes. So again, come back then and make sure you ask us some questions that you have over on our Facebook page in the comments section. We'll see you tomorrow morning.